She used a modified radio to blow up a passenger plane, killing 115 people. Now, she's living freely and comfortably in South Korea. She claims to be Japanese, Chinese, and even Korean. But none of those countries are really hers. She's only in her 20s, looks pure and innocent like a high school student, yet has already traveled to more than a dozen countries. She speaks multiple languages and has top-notch military training. So who is she? And why is she living her life in peace after committing such a monstrous crime? Hey everyone, I'm O0 Exploration. It's like the saying goes, it's not that I mind my bro struggling, it's that I can't stand him driving a Range Rover. July 27, 1953. North and South Korea officially signed an armistice agreement. From then on, no matter how much they fought behind the scenes, at least it was somewhat peaceful on the surface. But then, in 1983, something happened that threw North Korea off. South Korea, the little brother in North Korea's eyes, actually got the rights to host the 1988 Summer Olympics. North Korea, feeling slighted, suggested they co-host it together. They thought, hey, we're one big family. And South Korea, wanting peace on the peninsula, agreed. But when they started organizing, the differences between their camps became clear, and there were huge disagreements. North Korea's dream of co-hosting the Olympics was shattered, and this just deepened the hatred between them. North Korea declared they would boycott the Seoul Olympics, and behind the scenes, they started plotting revenge. On November 29, 1987, at 2:05 p.m., Korean Air Flight 858 took off from Baghdad, Iraq. The plane had a stopover in Abu Dhabi and Bangkok before heading to Seoul, South Korea. Most of the passengers were South Korean laborers returning home for the new year after working in the Middle East. But something went terribly wrong. As the plane was flying over Myanmar, the captain had just radioed that everything was normal. But a few minutes later, the plane disappeared off the radar. The crew didn't send out any distress signals, and no one could understand why. After the crash, South Korea launched a joint investigation with Myanmar and Thailand. Eventually, wreckage was found in the Andaman Sea, and all 115 people aboard were confirmed dead. At first, it was thought to be a technical failure because the plane had previously had problems with its landing gear. But something about the situation didn't add up. If the plane was having issues, why didn't the crew try to make an emergency landing? They had enough time, unless the plane had already broken up in midair. No one wanted to jump to conclusions. But then a suspicious lead appeared that threw out the idea of a technical failure. Investigators discovered that 15 people had gotten off the plane in Abu Dhabi. Among them were 2 Japanese passport holders, a 27-year-old woman named Mayumi Tani and a 69-year-old man, Tani Shinichi. After getting off, they bought tickets and flew to Bahrain. This odd behavior raised suspicions. They didn't stay long in Bahrain and were trying to fly to Rome when their forged passports were discovered, and they were arrested. At first, they claimed to be father and daughter. But when investigators separated them for questioning, they both independently requested cigarettes. The investigators, not thinking much of it, allowed them to smoke, but to their shock, the 2 pulled out cyanide from the cigarette pack. Mayumi was saved, but Shinichi died on the spot. This raised alarm in South Korea, and on December 15, 1987, Mayumi was extradited back to Korea. But that was just the beginning of the real battle. Who was she really? To South Korea, she was an enigma. Her claim to be Japanese didn't hold up at first. She refused to share any information, even going on a hunger strike to resist interrogation. But one day, she suddenly blurted out in fluent Chinese that she was Chinese, named Bai Kuihui, born in 1964 in Wuchang, Heilongjiang. She claimed she had grown up poor and moved to Guangzhou to work, then went to Macau, where she met Tani Shinichi, whom she called her godfather. Eventually, she was taken to Japan, where he controlled her life, even keeping her locked inside. She didn't know much about Japan at all. This explanation was so clever that it left the investigators with no further questions, but it still didn't explain why they'd tried to kill themselves. So the investigators didn't believe her story, and from there, a mental chess match began to crack her secrets. The investigators used small, subtle details. They casually asked her what brand of TV she'd seen in Japan. She unknowingly said Azalea, which is a brand from North Korea. Then they pretended to shake her hand and, in Korean, commented on how her hands showed signs of military training. She instinctively pulled her hand back when she understood. These small details were telling, but the real breakthrough came when the investigators started telling jokes in Korean. Mayumi, unable to contain herself, giggled and ran to the bathroom, where she tried to cover her laugh by flushing the toilet. As an agent, she wasn't very good at hiding her emotions, but she still refused to reveal her true identity. Then one day, the investigators changed tactics. They took her out for a drive through Seoul. As the car passed through the busy streets, Mayumi was shocked by the bustling city life. In the propaganda she'd been fed, South Koreans were suffering under the control of the U.S. and eagerly awaited salvation from the North. But here, people looked happy, busy, and well-fed. This moment shattered her worldview, and she realized she'd been deceived for over 20 years. That's when she decided to come clean. It turned out Mayumi's real name was Kim Hyun-hee. She was from Pyongyang, North Korea. Her father was a diplomat, and she had been selected for special training from a young age. She had lived in Guangzhou and Macau, became fluent in Chinese, Cantonese, and Japanese, with a particular focus on Japanese culture to help her blend in when carrying out missions. On October 4, 1987, she received an assignment to work with another seasoned agent, Kim Seung-il Tani Shinichi. They were tasked with bombing Korean Air Flight 858. They met up in Serbia, got explosives disguised as a radio, and traveled to Baghdad posing as a Japanese father and daughter. But there was a hiccup during the check-in process. The security wasn't strict enough to stop a radio. But the battery was an issue because the explosives couldn't be triggered without it. After some arguing, the staff relented, and the two managed to bring the battery on board. This small concession led to a deadly crash. Once on the plane, Kim Seung-il set the radio to explode in 9 hours. The two of them got off in Abu Dhabi, and not long after, the plane vanished from radar. The 115 people aboard perished, and the whole bombing was an act of petty revenge because North Korea had been excluded from the Olympic preparations. They attacked to scare people off from flying to the 1988 Seoul Olympics. In 1990, Kim Hyun-hee was sentenced to death in South Korea, but a year later, President Roh Tae-woo granted her a pardon. South Korea saw her as a victim of North Korean brainwashing, who had finally seen the truth and cooperated. Her presence was seen as valuable to South Korea, so she was released and settled there. Eventually, Kim Hyun-hee married one of her guards, had 2 children, and lived a happy life. But whether the families of the victims have truly forgiven her, that's another story.